Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a new week here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I'm Bill O'Brien, and we have absolutely a gorgeous day here in the mountains of Appalachia, and I'm assuming that your weather is good too, but ours has been rather yucky, if you will, for the last 10 days or so. We were caught in this. You may have seen weather reports about excessive rain and flooding in Chicago and through Indiana and various places, and we were on that path, and we didn't get the extreme rain that others got. But in terms of the gloom and the humidity, and it's been here for a number of days. So the best proof is the fact that for the last couple of weeks, up until this past week or so, we haven't had to cut grass because it was pretty much dormant. But as a result of all the rain we had last week, I was out there yesterday with my trusty lawnmower. It is a pleasure to be with you here at the Virtual Center. It's been a long time. We haven't been together since last Wednesday. So let me kind of bring you up to date on a little bit of the specifics. First of all, I want to welcome you, and I do mean that. I appreciate your willingness to give up a portion of your valuable time, of your day, to tune in to the Virtual Center. We hope that if you have been here or are back, that's a good sign. It kind of indicates that we must be doing something right. And the only thing that I can promise you is that that's the number one objective here. And I will continue to do everything that I can do to make your willingness to give up valuable time, which none of us have enough of, as meaningful for you as I can make it. I invite you to feel comfortable, in fact, to feel excited about the opportunity to participate actively in the program by calling and interacting and sharing with us your ideas, your suggestions, your concerns, your thinking on particular issues that we are discussing. We have a phone number that we have reserved specifically for your use, and we invite you to participate in this. Bob Kincaid, in his introduction, referred to this as an ongoing conversation. Well, the fact of the matter is, a conversation, more often than not, needs more than one person. So I encourage you to feel comfortable to participate actively in our program by offering your ideas or your suggestions. The phone number that we have reserved for you is area code 304-574-8178. That's 304-574-8178. If you would like to communicate with me directly via email, I would sincerely like to hear from you. I'll do the very best I can to respond and answer your questions or respond to your concerns as best I can. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906. That's all one word. No breaks. No hyphenization at all. waobrien906@gmail.com. And again, the phone number 304-574-8178. On Wednesday's program, if you'll recall, one of the themes I mentioned, one of the issues that I thought we would address this week, and I'd like to do that today, is the issue of class warfare, as it was a concern in the 18th century during the time of the drafting and the framing and the ratification of the Constitution of the United States. The issue is there. Very infrequently, however, is the issue addressed in any depth at all. People have seen references to it, but for the most part, they just pass by them, assuming that these kinds of thoughts and these kinds of ideas have existed in all places at all times. And so nothing special. I would suggest to you, however, that at the Constitutional Convention and at this point in the 18th century, these ideas were very, very serious considerations. They worried a lot of people. We'll get to that. Before we get into that, I would like to share with you just something that occurred for me just last evening. Those of you who've been connected or have been following, been with us here at the Virtual Center over the past year or so, may recall that last year, about this time, I was involved locally here in southern West Virginia in a United Way program called Dancing with the Stars. It's obviously a takeoff on the very, very popular television program of the same name. And what our local United Way has done here in the last couple of years is to select 12 people from the community, active people from the community that many people in the community would know, bankers and police and church leaders and business folks, things, and has paired them up into dancing duos, and we've had six couples that spend most of the summer practicing for an event that is held in mid-September. This year here, our Dancing with the Stars event is going to be held on Friday night, the 19th of November. The 19th of September. So it's less than a month away. Last year, I was one of the participants, and I'm obviously not a dancer, but the point that was made to me, and very successfully, was that dancing's really not what this is about. Finding ways to take care of those in need is what it's about. And once you confront that, then whatever you can do, my response was, if you and your board believe that I can contribute meaningfully to something like that, then who am I to say that I don't have the time, or I don't want to bother, or I don't dance well, or whatever the excuse would be. So I did it. And I have to tell you that it was not the beginning of a new career for me, let me put it that way. But we did it. And the bottom line was that here in southern West Virginia, in our local United Way region, we were successful through that one promotion of raising in excess of $113,000, which turned out to be close to 25% of the entire United Way goal for the year. Our goal was $525,000. And, this one event brought in close to 25% of that. And the fact that I could participate in something like that and make that kind of an impact on the needs of people in trouble here in our community was very, very important to me. However, one of the things that concerned me, and this is where I'm going with this, and I really would like your input, because I'm just thinking out loud here. This is not anything that I have reached final conclusions on at all. But one of the concerns I had at the time was a concern that, as a long-time supporter of our local United Way here, and I mean well over 20 years. I served on the board for 15 years, the board of directors of our local United Way for 15 years, up until 2008, I think, I believe. And one of the things that I consistently argued during my time on the board was that what made the United Way, especially this United Way, particularly important, I believe, was the extent to which this campaign, which ran, it was supposed to run officially for 3 months, for a 90-day period, from the 1st of September through September, October, and November. Was supposed to end December 1st. But the fact of the matter is, because we had a goal, rarely did we ever meet our goal by December 1st. And so most years, the campaign would run through the holidays and into January before we were able to claim that we made our goal. Excuse me. But we always did. And I have long believed, and have always believed, that in a region where jobs are as difficult to come by as here in Appalachia, making what are quite ambitious goals in our annual United Way campaign is something that really says quite a bit about this region and about the people here. It's a statement about this community and the caliber and quality of people in this community. I believe that. And as a member of the board, I used to go out to employers and talk to local employers all the time about regular deductions from employees for United Way donations. In other words, a dollar a check is what we would talk about. We would go out and meet with employees and ask them if they were willing to commit $1 per paycheck to the United Way. And it was very successful. We always made our goal. But the thing that impressed me as much as anything was that it was a community initiative. It was a community campaign. And one of the things that we could honestly say to employees and to their supervisors was that whatever you can afford to give, however little you think it might be, and however unimportant you think it might be, is important when we put it together with other people who by themselves don't feel that they can contribute enough to make a difference either. When we put it all together, it's enough to make a difference. And that was the gist of the campaign that we would conduct year after year. And my feeling always was that we ended up with a stronger, healthier community as a result. Because the whole initiative was built around the idea that we're all in this together, and we all do different things, and we all, depending on what we do, have different levels of income. Some of us can do things that others can't do financially. But we can all volunteer. We can all help serve some of the agencies that the United Way funds. And all of us together, within our own frame of reference, our own context, can make meaningful contributions, both financially and in terms of our time, to the needs of this community. And as a result, the entire community becomes stronger. I used to say that all the time when I visit employers and companies. It was easy for me to say because I believe it. I think the little bit that we've done here off and on over the 17 or 18 months that we've been here at the virtual center, on 3 or 4 different occasions, the issue of community has come up. And I think that over that time, I've made it pretty clear, I've tried to, what I believe community is about. And that's what I believe community is about. Community, by definition, must be inclusive. It cannot be exclusive. And the thing that bothered me a little bit about last year's Dancing with the Stars campaign idea, and it was I believe the 2nd year that we had done it. This current year is the 3rd year. The only concern that I had is that we were looking for ways to make more and more money, mainly for a very good reason, because the need has continued to grow. I mean, the data, I have all sorts of data, which I won't bore you with now, which which indicates that no matter how much we did year after year, it was never enough. There was always the need for more. Now, and I would say over the last 5 or 6, 7 years since the recession of 2007 and 2008, need that was what I thought was extreme then has become dire now. We have local food pantries that have no backlog. Their shelves have been stripped clean because the demand for food is exceeding the availability of food. My sense is that the spread of an increase in homelessness would support this kind of conclusion. Consequently, every year the United Way goal has gone up. Last year our goal, as I mentioned, was 525,000. I really didn't think we'd make it. Because of the job situation here, there's so many companies that have gone under over the last 4 or 5 years here that I really couldn't see us making a goal in excess of $500,000, but we made it. In years when I served on the board, our goal was 315,000, 325,000, 330,000. But when we get up to $500,000, that was a daunting goal for me, and we were able to make it. This year, our United Way has expanded because one of the adjoining United Way regions has gone belly up. And so consequently, we have our local United Way has become responsible for 3 more counties in this area and a number of additional agencies. The result is this year's United Way goal here is $825,000. We're approaching $1 million as a goal. The region is no stronger. The economy is no stronger. Jobs are no more plentiful. In fact, as you all know, coal jobs are in some serious trouble now. Much of the political campaign is revolving around Republican efforts to try to pin this on the president and the Obama EPA. But without getting political here, one of the things that bothered me last year was that in coming up with strategies for raising more and more money, logically, there was a tendency to look for ideas and events that would bring in substantial amounts of money quickly. And that has indeed been true. Consequently, the idea of involving the entire community in the campaign has kind of been pushed onto the back burner, not for any negative reason, but for reasons of logistics. In other words, the goal has become so large that it seems almost not worth the time of those involved in the United Way to go after the small campaign of the working poor, of working people. Instead, we're looking for the big bucks, for the big hit, for the event that can score 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, whatever they might be. And that tends to exclude significant elements of this community. Why is that a problem? Why do I see that as a problem? I see that as a problem because it seems to be likely perform negatively on the strength of the community itself. It tends to create a we and them mentality. It almost suggests to the casual observer that in this community we have one group of people who feels that it is their responsibility to the group. And from the way I look at community, that's deadly. I think the long-term outcome, dangers of that, far exceed making the goal, whatever it might be. Last evening, as I mentioned, there was a fundraiser which is part of the overall Dancing with the Stars campaign for this year. And what the Dancing with the Stars competition, this being the third year, what has evolved is that once the participants are asked to participate in the dancing event on the night of September 19th, the participants are expected during the 3, 4, or 5 month interim from the time they were first identified, which would have been early April, until now, September, they are expected to find ways to solicit money for the United Way campaign. In other words, sub-events. So, for example, we had in one of my dearest friends I have several friends that are involved in the dance competition this year. One of them, they rented one of our finest restaurants last evening, which was closed. It's a regular day. They are regularly closed on Sunday evenings, and they were persuaded to open and serve buffet dinner. Attendees were asked to buy a ticket for $100. There would be 125 tickets printed, which means that if all the tickets were sold, the overall income would be $125,000. Last night, and the drawing, and what the incentive was, besides contributing to the United Way, because all the money went to the United Way, the way they conducted the drawing was that they had a barrel with all the people's names on tickets that they had purchased, and they would pull the tickets out one by one. The last ticket, the last name, would win $5,000. So then last night, they were asking people in the audience to come up and volunteer to draw 5 names or 10 names, and then they'd ask somebody else to come up and draw 10. And that went on for the better part of the evening. Not only that, but besides the 125 tickets that were printed, when we arrived last night, we found out that there were an extra tickets added. 126, 127, 128, 129, and 130. Anybody whose name was drawn, and therefore they were out of the competition for the $5,000, could get back in by buying raffle tickets for the numbers that were the 5 numbers that were added. In other words, they would sell raffle tickets, 15 tickets for $10, et cetera, and then would pull one ticket, and whoever had the lucky number would get number 126, and that meant that they were back in the hopper for the $5,000. And so it was almost like an auction, as they had runners running around the room selling long strips of tickets. 6 tickets for $5, 12 tickets for $10, 30 tickets for $25, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of it for the United Way. In other words, all of it for a good cause. But on the other hand, it was, all I could think of was this is turning into almost an overwhelming hustle. And I felt uncomfortable about that because I know it's not. It's the cause is, one of the local food pantries is within walking distance of my house. And I go up there, when I walk uptown every day, there's a line because they do free lunches during the day. And 40 to 50% of the people in line are children who during the school year are fed lunch at school. But during the summer, they have to depend on the free lunch up here at the food pantry. So the cause is real. The challenge to the welfare of fellow human beings, of neighbors, is real. And the willingness of people who can in this community to step up and participate actively in these kinds of events in order to help out their fellow man is creditable. But at the same time, there's a key element missing from this whole thing. And it's the involvement of the bulk of the members of this community. There used to be an effort to solicit that input. But now, because need has become so huge, it's almost like the campaign doesn't have time to go after nickels and dimes anymore. And that bothers me. Because people who can only give $1 may, in fact, be giving more of themselves when they give that $1 than people who are giving $500 or $1,000, if that makes sense. And that kind of willingness to commit to community, we can't afford to lose, not in today's society, not given the kinds of things that are happening with jobs and the economy and the expansion, the growth of inequality in this society. We can't afford to lose this sense of community goodwill. And I feel like in this particular situation, for the best of reasons, we might be losing it. And of course, there's associated with this is the danger that those on the receiving end will pretty much look to those on the giving end to be taken care of, and therefore will maybe stop trying to take care of themselves. There's an element in every, we know that. We can't afford to cater to it. We certainly to do things which cause it to grow. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's been bothering me for the last 15, 16 hours since I got home last evening. And I had told myself that on today's program here at the Virtual Center, I really wanted to at least air my concerns. About. In fact, today here at the Virtual Center, we're going to be talking about community, and we're going to be talking about the kinds of things that hold a community together, that make a community a community. These are all really very, very important things. Community is critically important. We are not a nation of individuals who put the premium on our own individual freedom all the time, in spite of what politicians tell us. As President Obama said in one of his more controversial comments a year ago, doing very well individually, in business, financially, you didn't do it by yourself. And we know that many on the right took issue with that, because their whole idea is the idea of individual freedom and opportunity, and government red tape, getting rid of government red tape, and government's becoming too big and too intrusive and too overbearing and all of these other things. The fact of the matter is, it's living in and participating in a community which makes it possible for individuals within that community to become very successful. And there's a political danger that people's appreciation for the importance of community is being diminished. Of course, part of the reason for this is because we all know that associated or coming from the root of the word community is communism. And there's a political effort to try to associate those who argue for community and put the interests of community first. In other words, those that are willing to put the public interest ahead of their own private interest. The founders called it civic virtue. Some of our more conservative political spokesmen today are inclined to call it treason. Therefore, there's a conscious effort in our community to downplay the whole idea of community. That's no question, that's one of the big issues helping to understand or explain the opposition to the Affordable Care Act, to President Obama's health care program. So much of it revolves around this issue of community and the rights of everybody in community. And the idea that if you are a member of community, that entitles you to be able to expect certain things. Community is not something that we merely take from. Community needs to be something that we are willing to give back to. And what makes community strong is when it is inclusive and the vast majority of people are able to participate actively in it. And consequently, anything that we can do to strengthen community is a good thing. And that's why this particular campaign bothered me. I was very, very uncomfortable last evening. Because what we were talking about is how we need all the money we raise. It all goes for a good cause. It goes to help people who are not in this room because they can't afford to be here. And that really concerned me. Because I think we're in danger in our local community here of losing the sense of community that made this place very special. And how we raise that flag, how we hold up a red flag and say, wait a minute, let's talk about this. Let's have a discussion about this. I don't know. Because it's very, very sensitive territory, because it makes, if when you raise concerns, helping the poor or something, that's not it at all. But the reality is that it takes a strong community to deal with the kind of issues that we have reduced to a numerical number, a dollar goal, a campaign goal. But it's what goes into that dollar figure that is really significant. And if there is no sense of community and no sense of people being willing to give and help each other, then that goal can't go anywhere but up. because there are going to be individuals in need, and they are not going to be able to turn to a community to help resolve those needs. And when that happens, you can't raise enough money to address that kind of a situation. That's my concern. That's my issue for today, as it were. It bothers me quite a bit. I don't want to make a fast transition here back into the 18th century. But one of the things that we talked about last Wednesday as being on the docket for today's program was the issue, for lack of a better term, of what we call class warfare. How many times have we heard in politics today people accusing other people of engaging in class warfare political politics, or class warfare tactics, or this is a war on women, or attack on the poor, or from the perspective of the wealthy? Mitt Romney was, if you remember in his campaign, was talking about a campaign against the rich, that there was a campaign effort aimed at success, aimed at curbing success and capping success in this country through taxes and various other things. And that in the process we were losing, we were jeopardizing people's individual freedom to be successful. And we were, in a sense, attaching negative connotations to being willing to work and become successful. It was almost like there was something evil about success, about income, about people who lived in nice neighborhoods and drove nice cars and various other things. There was almost something evil about it. And if you remember, that was a theme in the 2012 presidential campaign in this country, as it's been in campaigns previously. But we don't talk about it. And when we do talk about it, it's usually accusing somebody of doing it. Rarely, however, do people take seriously and spend time reflecting upon the concept of class warfare, the issue of class warfare. Translation: poor versus the rich, the many versus the few. It would be naive for any of us to believe that this is something that is relatively new, or that is only something that is new. In fact, there are people who claim, who argue, that the whole idea of class warfare is something we can pin on Karl Marx in the 19th century with his Communist Manifesto. The implication is, prior to Marx and Marx's overemphasis on class, this was never really an issue. Well, the fact of the matter is, it was an issue. It was a big issue. But it is an issue that people find very difficult to talk about. In fact, there's a mentality associated with this that suggests that you better not talk about it, because if you talk about it, it might happen. And the best way to keep it from happening is to pretend it's not even there. But every once in a while, we are forced to recognize that it is there. And I think over the last 10 days or 2 weeks or so, on the daily news from Ferguson, Missouri, we've been confronted once again with the realities of situations within our nation that many of us try hard to pretend are not there. We know that they're there because every once in a while they rear their ugly heads. And the killing of Michael Brown, whose funeral was just this morning in Ferguson, unleashed an incredible level of social upheaval in Ferguson and in the surrounding areas right near St. Louis, Missouri, that have attracted attention not only all over this country but all over the world now for at least a week, better than a week. And things have been very, very quiet, but at the same time very, very tense over the last 3 or 4 days, 3 or 4 nights in Ferguson. Some people have been concerned that the Michael Brown funeral today might fire it all up again. I guess we'll have to wait and see whether in fact that's true. There have been criticisms of the protesters. There have been criticisms of outside agitators who seem to be using the death of Michael Brown as an excuse to come into Ferguson and cause trouble. There have been those who focus on the behavior of the police department. There are those who have been focusing on the governor and the actions of the governor, and the fact that in calling in the National Guard and neighboring police departments, it turned Ferguson into a war zone, which seemed to make the residents of Ferguson who were out in the streets protesting criminals. And it almost seemed to make the situation one between the state and its own citizens. And that battlefield mentality, if you will, was even exacerbated by the fact that so many police departments have inherited military equipment no longer in use in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so not only are the police on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, but so also are Humvees and M16 rifles and any number of other battlefield-associated paraphernalia. And people began to realize that this was probably further inflaming the situation rather than helping to resolve it. And of course, associated with this is there's the psychology of whether in fact you could, you gain more with sugar than with a whip. And that translates into our foreign policy in terms of how we deal with ISIS and how we deal in Afghanistan and how we deal with the situation in the Middle East and on and on and on. I mean, we can't, obviously, you can go so many different directions with this. But what I would like to do here at the virtual center today, we're at 45 minutes after the hour. We're about 3/4 of the way through our first hour. What I would like to do today is spend a little bit of time addressing this issue from a historical perspective. Namely, looking at it from the perspective of the framers themselves. It's there, it's always been there, we've known it's there, but it's never received much attention. The thinking has been, for those that have even bothered to think about it, the thinking has been that America in the 18th century was predominantly a rural agricultural society. We had a number of cities fairly rapidly growing cities in the east and in the middle states in the north. But the reality was that most Americans lived in rural America. And that very fact causes many people to believe that the concept of class warfare is not a factor in a rural area, but only applies to urban areas. In fact, if you think back, Thomas Jefferson, in his notes on the state of Virginia, made the case that the stability and security of America was contingent on remaining agricultural, on America remaining an agricultural nation. The idea that farmers were, in Jefferson's eyes, God's chosen people. There was something noble, something moral, something spiritual about people who worked in the dirt with their hands and created life, made things grow. There was something magical and religious about that. Jefferson believed that those nations which had experienced social upheaval and class warfare were nations where large numbers of people without property, propertyless people, were crowded into crowded neighborhoods with inadequate housing and inadequate health facilities. And what you were doing in an urban environment was just creating a situation where class warfare was bound to erupt. Jefferson believed, and he said so as president, that the stability of the United States had always been and would continue to be based on the extent to which the nation remained rural and agricultural. There's no question that Jefferson believed that the opportunity to purchase Louisiana from Napoleon in 1815 was an opportunity to double or triple the land size of the United States. Jefferson believed that in making the Louisiana purchase, he had guaranteed the peace and stability of this society for generations to come. Because now there was enough land and enough property for everybody. Everybody could become a property owner. Everybody could establish a stake in society, a vested interest in stability. The idea being that if people had something to lose, they would become good, watchful, vigilant citizens. Didn't matter how much they had. It was the idea that people that don't have anything have nothing to lose. They're willing to take risks. They become radical. They're much more susceptible to being drawn in to class-based and revolutionary movements of one sort or another. It is, to be blunt about it, the thinking that Madison had in mind when he talked about the majority faction. Madison says in Federalist number 10, on no uncertain terms, that the unequal distribution of property has been and continues to be the major source of factions in all Republican governments throughout history. Those who have power, property, and those who don't are always at odds. What I'm suggesting to you is that in the proper perspective, Madison's Federalist number 10 is a how-to lesson in organizing a political system in such a way that the majority faction can never organize, can never unite, can never come together for its own common interests. The freedom of individual Americans to pursue property and to have that property protected once they acquire it is directly threatened by the reality of the majority faction in Madison's frame of reference. The fact that Madison wrote this in the Federalist is devoted to, actually, number 10 and number 51, and others that are associated with the structure of government, the whole idea of separation of powers and checks and balances. This whole litany of terms that we've grown up with in school as part of classes in government or civic education or whatever you wanted to call them. Individual freedom, separation of powers, checks and balances, all these other internal checks and systems are all designed to do what? They are designed to make sure that the majority of people never achieve power. It is a, for all practical purposes, Federalist number 10 is a how-to essay on how to make sure that the majority faction can never organize and seize power. Because Madison believes clearly that whenever the majority does come together and seize power, they will use their majority rule status as an opportunity to take from those who have and give it to those who don't have. But we've looked at Federalist number 10. We actually read through Federalist number 10 here in the virtual center. I don't believe that we would be we would be wasting our time if we devoted a program or two in the near future to doing the same thing. Going back to Federalist number 10 and Federalist number 51 and pouring through them in some depth and seeing exactly the way that Madison conceptualized the problem and conceived a solution to address that problem. But let me add one more thing as we approach the top of our hour here. We're at 54 minutes after the hour. A few weeks ago, in detail, we looked at Madison's notes on Alexander Hamilton's speech of June 18th to the Constitutional Convention. That's the speech in which Hamilton spoke for close to 6 hours. It is the speech in which he spent the first portion of his talk pointing out the weaknesses of Confederation government. In other words, the weaknesses of the current Articles of Confederation. And then he moved into the two plans that were on the table to address the weaknesses of the Articles. One was the Virginia plan, drafted by Madison, and the other was the New Jersey plan, which was the small state alternative to the Virginia plan. And the New Jersey plan, while it made substantial changes in the Articles of Confederation, was committed to maintaining the idea of the Articles, to maintaining the idea of Confederation. Hamilton, in his speech, made sure to address the fact that he didn't believe that either one of those plans could work. To Hamilton, the only thing that could work would be the strongest government that the convention could get the people to go along with. Hamilton's criticism of the Virginia plan suggests that he didn't believe the Constitution of the United States was strong enough. He didn't believe the national government was strong enough. And in his June 18th speech, he said that when he criticized the Virginia plan. There's no question that Hamilton's contribution to the Federalist Papers is in some ways a rehash of his June 18th speech to the Constitutional Convention. There's no question that Federalists 6, 7, 8, and 9, the Federalist Papers from 6 to 9, are almost verbatim taken from his notes on the speech he delivered to the Constitutional Convention on the 18th of June. One thing we need to think about, this is kind of an aside, but I think it's appropriate. While we have long admired the depth of the Federalist Papers, it stands to reason that Madison and Hamilton, the major authors, did not come up with these things for the New York newspapers at the time. In other words, they weren't sitting down and writing these Federalist Papers from scratch in June of 1788. Much of what was in these Federalist Papers was in things that Madison and Hamilton had both written before. There's no question that the first several Federalist Papers that came out, written by Hamilton, were pretty much revised versions of the speech that he had given to the Constitutional Convention on the 18th of June. The difference, however, and I think this is a difference that we need to appreciate, the difference, however, was when he spoke on the 18th of June, he was telling the convention that neither the New Jersey plan nor the Virginia plan could work. When he wrote the Federalist Papers, he was trying to convince the voters of New York that the Constitution of the United States drafted by the convention could work, will work. Consequently, he has to contradict himself, because many of the things he assured the voters about in the Federalist Papers are things that he had told the convention could never work. So it is possible to look at Hamilton especially and find serious places where he could be accused of hypocrisy or speaking out of both sides of his mouth at the same time. The situations were different. On June 18th, he was telling the convention that both of the programs that they had before them were insufficient. When he wrote the Federalist Papers, he was trying to make the case that one of them would work. So I think the situation changed, and so did his presentation. But the fact of the matter is, what really tells the story here is why he believed neither one of those plans would work. And in our second hour today, we'll look at that by looking a little bit at Hamilton's Federalist number 9. We have reached the top of the hour. It's now 1 minute after the hour of 2 here in the East. Let's pause for 5 minutes. We'll take a break, and then we'll come back, and we'll continue by taking a look at the issue of class warfare as being a factor in the structure and ratification of the Constitution of the United States. This is Bill O'Brien. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Please stay with us. Thank you, Bob Kincaid. I had trouble getting my microphone on, and thank you. I love that. I love that music. I love good jazz, and that was great. Great stuff. Welcome to the Virtual Center. If you are just joining us, thank you for giving us of your time. If you've been with us through the first hour, we thank you for staying with us. Our phone number, area code 304-574-8178. That's 304-574-8178. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906@gmail.com. We ended our first hour talking about the extent to which concerns related to what we call, for lack of a better term, class warfare, were on the minds of at least some of the delegates when the Constitution of the United States was being drafted. And one of the things that I did in the first hour right towards the end is not, I didn't go to Federalist number 10 because we've been there already. But there's no question that when you think about what Madison was talking about in terms of controlling the effects of the majority faction, this is exactly the concerns that he had in mind. And we ended the hour by referencing Alexander Hamilton's 6-hour speech to the Constitutional Convention on the 18th of June, 1787. And one of the things that Hamilton does in that speech is make the case to the convention that he didn't believe either one of the two plans on the table at the time, the Virginia plan, which was the large state plan proposed by James Madison, and the small state plan proposed by William Paterson of New Jersey, called the New Jersey Plan. He didn't believe that either one of them would be successful, because he didn't believe that either one of them created a government strong enough to control society's tendencies, if you will, to control the masses. At least one time before on the Virtual Center, and my guess is more than once, I've made reference to Hamilton's statement before the Constitutional Convention. It was in this June 18th speech. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the quote right in front of me now, but I'll show you where it came from in a moment. Hamilton makes the case to the convention and says the following: all communities divide themselves into the few and the many. The few are the rich and well-born. The many are the rest of the people. And then Hamilton goes on to say, give therefore to the first group, the few, a reason to support good government, and since they have nothing to gain by change, they will do everything in their power to secure good government. And I usually use that quote as a way to explain Hamilton's financial program, which was designed to give all sorts of commercial and financial tax breaks to the commercial interests of the eastern cities, of the northern cities, the merchant communities, if you will, the bankers, the insurance people, the shipbuilders, all of those engaged in commerce. Hamilton believed that the only way the United States of America under President Washington could become truly independent was to break the dependency on manufactured goods that America suffered from as a result of the behavior of Great Britain while they were colonies. If you remember, the mother country never would allow the colonists to manufacture. Rather, they insisted that the role of the colonies was to extract raw materials and send them to the mother country for processing. The jobs of manufacture would be in England. And then the finished goods would be brought back to America and sold. So the colonists were seen as sources of raw materials as well as a vibrant market for processed goods. That was the way that the colonies could really feed into the overall plan of the empire. All of that would be contradicted and destroyed if you allowed the colonists to develop their own manufacturing capability. That would make it unnecessary for the colonists to look to England to purchase manufactured goods if they were made locally. So what the mother country did was forbid the colonists to manufacture their own goods. Rather, the mother country insisted that the colonies remain dependent for manufactured goods on the mother country. Also, Mother England made it illegal for the colonists to trade with any other nation except England. Those were the so-called Navigation Acts, if you remember those from your textbooks. So consequently, when the United States became independent of Great Britain, it had a vibrant agricultural capability, but was very, very deficient in manufacturing. Consequently, Hamilton's financial program was committed to fixing that balance by strengthening America's capability to manufacture as well as to trade. So consequently, it looked like Hamilton's whole program was geared towards the north and the eastern cities, because indeed it was. It wasn't fair from the perspective of the South or from the perspective of those in the West. It clearly wasn't fair. One section was being treated differently than the other sections, and that was the point that both Jefferson and Madison made in forming the Jeffersonian opposition. But Hamilton's position is, It's not about fairness, it's about power. And power is contingent on independence. As long as we remain dependent for manufactured goods on other nations, we'll never be powerful because we'll never be independent. We'll always be dependent for something that we need. Kind of like our dependence on foreign oil that's been such an issue for so long. When Jefferson became president, he believed, and this is part of the reason why the textbooks point out to us, that Jefferson's foreign policies were so disastrous. Jefferson believed that if we allowed manufacturing to develop here and allowed big cities to become a reality in America, then we would be jeopardizing the stability that that agricultural rural nation brings us. In other words, we would not remain a nation of farmers if we started to develop large cities with huge manufacturing capabilities. And Jefferson also believed that once you create those, you are creating the ingredients of class warfare in America. And you don't want to do that. So Jefferson's strategy for foreign policy was quite the opposite of Hamilton's. Jefferson's argument was, if we strengthen our agricultural capabilities, if we become so agriculturally lucrative that nations of the world will be dependent on us for our cotton and for our wheat and for our tobacco and for our rice and whatever else we might produce, then we can gain diplomatic leverage by the dependency of the rest of the world on our agricultural capability. In other words, we can become so productive agriculturally that it will offset our deficiencies in manufacturing. Consequently, Jefferson's response to the war that resumed between England and France during his administration was to embargo Europe. In other words, basically get Congress to pass legislation that we wouldn't trade with anybody. He believed that both sides would come crawling to us in their needs because they were so dependent on us for what they needed agriculturally. And of course that never panned out, and the United States experienced one of the worst recessions in the Jefferson administration it ever had. So most economists conclude that Hamilton was right on about the need to promote manufacturing. But the fact of the matter is, Hamilton wouldn't argue with Jefferson's idea of stability. Hamilton realized that with manufacturing comes cities, and with cities comes congestion, and with congestion comes unemployment and joblessness, and with unemployment and joblessness comes poverty, and with an increase of poverty comes crime, and with an increase of crime comes the potential of class warfare. Hamilton was quite aware that that was a reality. That's why he was insistent that you had to create the strongest possible federal government you could, because anything less than that would not be able to keep order. Turns out, of course, that Hamilton is stuck, if you will, with the Constitution of the United States. Makes the case at the end of his speech about Britain's Constitution being the model, and how we needed a monarchy, and we needed a president for life, and we needed a court for life, and we needed an upper body, the Senate, for life. Hamilton believed that within the framework of the Republican model, because it had to be Republicanism, the American people would accept nothing less, you had to build in as much as possible the kind of strength in government necessary to keep the lid on. Thus his statement on the 18th of June to the convention about all societies dividing themselves into the few and the many. What you had to do, Hamilton says, is you got to give the few a reason to support the government. And if you make it financially lucrative for them to support the government, since they will not receive any benefit by change, Hamilton says they'll become the major supporters of government. And that's what you have to have. You have to have the best people behind your government. That's his speech. Let me share with you I missed my page here. If you'll bear with me one moment. I'm looking for a speech by David Hume. And well, let me go back and I can find that later. But I wanted to find David Hume in one of his essays wrote a statement very, very similar to Hamilton's speech about the few and the many before the Constitutional Convention. It's obviously where he got it. But what I wanted to do is share with you for a few moments a portion, not the entire thing, but a portion of Hamilton's Federalist number 9. Most people have focused obviously on Federalist number 10, Madison. But the papers leading up to that, 6, 7, 8, and 9, are Hamilton's. And what makes Federalist number 9 particularly significant, I think, is not only is it significant in leading into Madison's Federalist number 10, but it also addresses the very, very same things that Hamilton addressed when he spoke to the convention on the 18th of June. And in the New York newspapers, in the Independent Journal on Wednesday, November 21st, 1787, Federalist number 9 appeared. The title, Hamilton's title for this Federalist paper, "The Utility of the Union as a Safeguard Against Domestic Faction and Insurrection." And this is what Hamilton says in the very first paragraph of Federalist number 9. "A firm union will be of the utmost moment to the peace and liberty of the states as a barrier against domestic faction and insurrection. It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the distractions with which they were continually agitated, and at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy." What a sentence. There's no way to read that except to clearly see what Hamilton was telling these delegates. A firm union of the utmost to the peace and liberty of the states as a barrier against domestic faction and insurrection. And then he goes back to the republics of Greece and Rome. It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the distractions with which they were continually agitated and at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy. Tyranny and anarchy. Anarchy, the total breakdown of law and order, the total breakdown of all the elements of what we call society. And once you have a total breakdown of law and order, then the only thing that will bring back peace and stability is tyranny. The military. Think of the French Revolution. The extremes of the French Revolution and the use of the guillotine. In panic, what do the French people do? They turn to Napoleon. They turn to the all-powerful military figure because they are desperate for a return to law and order and peace, and they'll pay any price for it. Think of the Germans' willingness between World War I and World War II to support Hitler after they feel that they were humiliated by the Allies in World War I. The economy goes crazy. The entire German society is in chaos. There are no jobs. Germans are desperate. When desperate people hear somebody like Adolf Hitler, they respond. When the French heard the words of a figure like Napoleon, they responded. What Hamilton is saying is throughout history, you always get tyranny. It's the only solution to anarchy. If they exhibit occasional calms, Hamilton says, if these republics exhibit occasional calms, these only serve as short-lived contrast to the furious storms that are to succeed. If now and then intervals of felicity open to view, we behold them with a mixture of regret arising from the reflection that the pleasing scenes before us are soon to be overwhelmed by the tempestuous waves of sedition and party rage. Hamilton is predicting the future in America if we don't take the opportunity to create the kind of strong central government that is the task before us. If they exhibit occasional calms, they're always short-lived, and it's only a preview to the furious storms that are to succeed, that are to come. If now and then intervals of felicity open to view, in other words, if every now and then we see hope, we see light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, we behold them with a mixture of regret arising from the reflection that the pleasing scenes before us are soon to be overwhelmed by the tempestuous waves of sedition and party rage. If momentary rays of glory break forth from the gloom, while they dazzle us with a transient and fleeting brilliancy, they at the same time admonish us to lament that the vices of government should pervert the direction and tarnish the luster of those bright talents and exalted endowments for which they favored soils that produce them have been so justly celebrated. If things look like they're under control, be aware, Hamilton says, it's only temporary. It can't last. He goes on in the next paragraph with the same theme. From the disorders that disfigure the annals of those republics, the advocates of despotism have drawn their arguments, not only against the forms of republican government, but against the very principles of civil liberty. So if you look back on the history of republics, Hamilton says, what characterizes them are the disorders and the violence and the rage and the insurrections that have characterized their existence. And it's that the advocates of despotism have used to base their case against Republican government, also against the very principles of civil liberty. Those people that argue that you got to have a dictatorship, you have to have a military dictatorship or a king, point to those as justifications for their argument. They have decried all free government consistent with the order of society, indulge themselves in malicious exaltation over its friends and partisans. Happily for mankind, stupendous fabrics reared on the basis of liberty, which have flourished for ages, have, in a few glorious instances, refuted their gloomy sophisms. And I trust America will be the broad and solid foundation of other edifices, not less magnificent, which will be equally permanent monuments of their errors. So what Madison is saying here is we've got to make this republic work. And then he goes on, if you remember, in his speech on the 18th of June, to talk about the benefits of the British Constitution, of the British system, the combination of Parliament combined with a strong monarchy, etc., etc., etc. In this Federalist paper, his challenge is to convince his readers that the Constitution will work. Consequently, he's got to convince the people that Republican government can work. Consequently, he's got to deal with Montesquieu, because Montesquieu, the authority on republicanism, is being used as the major argument against the Constitution, because the argument of the Anti-Federalists is that in a large area like the United States, you can't make Republican government work. So that's what Hamilton has to take care of in Federalist number 9. But let me suggest to you what he opens with. He opens with the history of class warfare that exists in republics throughout history. I'm thumbing through my materials again. Here we go. I want to read a passage from Douglas Adair in his book called Fame and the Founding Fathers, Essays by Douglas Adair. Adair is talking about Hamilton, and he's talking about Hamilton's proposal for a system that will work at the convention. And this is the paragraph where Douglas Adair summarizes Hamilton's presentation on the 18th of June. When Hamilton presented his analysis of the vices of republicanism to his acceptant audience in Philadelphia, he also offered the traditional remedy which statesmen and philosophers from antiquity on had proposed as the only cure for the evils of the three types of pure government. This remedy was to mix or compound elements of monarchy aristocracy, and democracy into one balanced structure. There was, Hamilton reasoned, little danger of class war, and a state which had a king vested with more power than the political organs of government representing either the rich or the poor. In other words, you don't have to worry about the class war between the rich and the poor if you have a government that's stronger than both of them. The size of the country and the amazing turbulence of American democracy, he said, makes him despair of republicanism in the United States. Without an elective monarchy who, once in office, could not be voted out by majority rule. Now he's addressing Hamilton's proposal to the convention. This was the last part of Hamilton's speech. The people, i.e. the multitudinous poor, would directly elect the lower house of the legislature. A Senate to represent the rich would be elected for life. And to guard against the poison of democracy in the separate states, they would be transformed into administrative districts with their governors appointed by the elected king. That's Hamilton's plan. If you remember, we read it here at the Virtual Center a couple of weeks ago. And then Adair goes on to say this about Hamilton's reaction in the convention. We mistake the significance of Hamilton's proposal of an elective monarch as a solution to the crisis of 1787 if we think of his plan either original or unrepresentative of the thought of important segments of American opinion in 1787. The strength of Hamilton's position lay in the fact that his proposal was the traditional, the standard, indeed, as history showed, the only solution for the specific dangers of interclass and interstate conflict that were destroying the imperfect union. In other words, what Douglas Adair is saying is that Hamilton's speech was probably shocking to the delegates because of the candor in it. But he wasn't saying something that they didn't ever hear before or ever think about. He was saying the unspeakable. He was putting into words what many of them believed but couldn't say. Think of the reactions of different groups of people who are watching the situation in Ferguson, Missouri over the previous week in the news in the evening. And think about the reactions of different groups of people. Whose fault is it? Is it the police's fault? Is it the community's fault? Is it a particular race's fault? Is it outside agitators and troublemakers? Is it a poorly trained police force? Is it the military armaments that the police force used in Ferguson? All of them have their supporters. So if you come out publicly and say, for example, this is an indication that we have not solved the issues of race in America, people are going to kind of draw back because you're saying something they don't want to hear. They may know it's real. They don't want to hear it. They surely don't want to let other people hear what they think about it. What Douglas Adair is saying is that when Hamilton spoke on the 18th of June, 1787, he wasn't saying things that the Constitutional Convention delegates had never heard or thought about before. Fact of the matter is, he was. Proof. In 1776, Carter Braxton had offered almost the exact same plan as the ideal constitution for the state of Virginia. When independence was on the table in 1776, Carter Braxton proposed a constitution almost identical to Hamilton's plan, this one for the independent state of Virginia. In May 1782, Colonel Louis Nicola invited Washington to use the army to set himself up as king. That would be the only thing that could work in America. At the Constitutional Convention, Hugh Williamson of North Carolina, on July 24th, it was pretty certain that we should at some time or other have a king, but he wished no precaution to be admitted that might postpone the event as long as possible. That's Hugh Williamson to the convention as recorded by James Madison. Again, Madison writes, Mr. Williamson remarked, it was pretty certain that we should come at some time or other to have a king. But Williamson wished no precaution to be admitted that might postpone the event as long as possible. Madison, in his private papers, James Madison himself, does mathematical statistical calculations and concludes that it is a certainty that the end of republicanism in the United States will come approximately 142 years after 1787, about the decade of the 1930s. Madison himself proposed that what we're trying to do here will only last for about 142 years. And in one of Adair's footnotes to this, he explains Madison's statistics, and he says the following in the footnote. The statistical estimate was of probable American population growth, which Madison thought in 1829 would by 1929 be 192 million. Excuse me. So Madison predicted that by 1929 America's population would be about 192 million. This would end the nation's precious advantage, both of wide distribution of landed property and universal hope of acquiring property. In other words, once we reached 192 million, there wouldn't be any land, any property from anybody. We'd have large numbers of people who didn't own property. At that time, Madison figured, being nearly as crowded as England or France, with a society increasingly polarized between wealthy capitalists and indigent laborers, Madison feared an amended constitution more like England's would be required. So even Madison admitted that by the time the nation reached a couple of 100 million, there'd be no property, no longer would be a land of farmers. At that time, society would break down into wealthy capitalists and indigent laborers who own no property. At that point, we'll need a constitution like England's. We'll need a king and a government with the power to keep order, because republicanism won't work anymore. Madison wrote that in his letters. John Adams, in his 3-volume Defense of Government, says, in future ages, if the present states become great nations, rich, powerful, and luxurious, as well as numerous, the feelings and good sense of Americans will dictate to them reform of their governments to a nearer resemblance to the British Constitution, complete with a hereditary king and a hereditary Senate. Gouverneur Morris of New York, at the Constitutional Convention, we must have a monarch sooner or later, and the sooner we take him while we are able to make a bargain with him, the better. Benjamin Franklin, on June 2nd, at the Constitutional Convention, quote, there is a natural inclination in mankind to kingly government. I am apprehensive, therefore, perhaps too apprehensive, that the government of these states may in future times end in monarchy. But this catastrophe, I think, may be long delayed. It's very obvious that what Hamilton was saying on June 18th to the convention was falling on very receptive ears. So consequently, I think, Bob, I'm looking. Do we have a caller? Maybe not. I'm sorry.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But
you're telling me the music is John Coltrane.
Yeah, the music was. Yeah, that was.
I thought John Coltrane was on the phone.
No, he's dead.
I know. Oh God.
Let me ask you a quick question though.
Go right ahead.
Because this is all just sitting. My eyes are just bugged out at what I'm hearing. You're telling us that the framers were sort of admitting that theirs was an exercise, that as far as Republican government was concerned, they recognized that theirs was in the long run an exercise in futility?
You would draw that conclusion by looking at Madison and this particular letter in his papers. But it really gives more meaning to Franklin's very famous statement about when somebody outside the convention hall asked Franklin what we've got, and Franklin said, a republic if we can keep it. Apparently there's more to that than I ever thought. I just thought it was kind of a quick, fast comment on Franklin's part. But there may be something to it, because it seems now to me to suggest that there's a strong sentiment in that room among those delegates that what we're doing may not work.
Then can I ask a follow-up, please?
Sure.
It's interesting that Madison's statistical calculation winds up in what would be the middle of the Great Depression.
It sure is, yeah.
And the rise of the longest-serving president we have ever had.
And that's true. That's right.
But secondarily, I think you can, in terms of just a scholarly appreciation, I would love to know what factors played into those statistical calculations of Madison's, because you can, and I'm not some sort of neo-Confederate. You know that very well. Right. But by the time that Jefferson and Adams are dying on July the 4th, 1826, I think both of them have recognized that the vision of 1776, and quite arguably the vision of 1787, was already, that horse had long since left the barn. Right. Right. I agree with you. And so there's Madison in 1829, and I would argue that maybe he was a little overly optimistic, because the character and essential nature of the federal government changed forever in 1861. Yes. Yes. Prior to that, you have you have the coming of the railroads. It's with the coming of the railroads that you get the rise of the administrative state, which of course gets vested in the executive branch, and a reimagining of what government means. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if the reason that they defaulted to a monarchy was because monarchy was the only thing with which they really had passing experience. I mean, this is 1787. The French Terror hasn't begun yet.
Right, that's what they knew was monarchy. And the most interesting thing, Bob, which kind of reinforces this, is in spite of all the things they wrote and felt and said about the king and about Great Britain through the War for Independence, they never really questioned the fact that the British Constitution was the best.
Yeah, if you're going to have a king, this is the kind of king to have.
This is the kind of king. I mean, there was one. He wasn't absolutely all powerful because Parliament had wrested a substantial amount of power from the king in 1689 in the Glorious Revolution. And
they seem to manifest some considerable respect for Parliament. If it was as respectable as they thought, why in God's name didn't they create one instead of? Because see, I believe that the three branches as they're presently constituted are unwieldy, Dr. Bill.
Yeah, I understand.
And we've almost reached a point of stasis. Well, why didn't they go with a more parliamentary form?
I believe because the nature of the two-party system that developed in America, which Madison was very instrumental in creating, I think he saw the non-responsible two-party system that developed in America as a way to postpone the day of reckoning, so to speak. Because the political system, rather than allow society to divide into parties or factions, the political system would bring all the groups together and force them to compromise in order to achieve power through the electoral process. And that creates stability and allows the nation to grow and at the same time remain stable as long as everybody's concerns are channeled toward the center, if that makes sense, toward the political.
And as long as everyone is acting in something resembling good faith.
Good, yeah, exactly. And so what you're doing is you're basically isolating the extremes so that they remain extremes. And for a long time I think that worked. Because Madison's concern is, as long as all the different factions and groups are trying to secure power through the ballot box by garnering majority support, then we don't have to worry about extremes. We don't have to worry about the majority faction uniting, because there'll be so many minor factions that the stability of society will be guaranteed by its apparent instability. In other words, the fact that there are so many different groups and parties competing with each other, it would seem on the surface to be chaotic. Madison's point is it's exactly the opposite of chaos. It's the basis of order. It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Well, it is, but as visionary as these people obviously were, did they simply not see not so much the change in the state? Were they unable to comprehend the idea of the rise of the corporate structure? Is that part of it?
I think so. In the 1780s, yeah, corporations, and this is, I did some reading on this quite a while ago, but as I recall, corporations in America were very unpopular because the only corporations that most of these people knew about were British corporations. And it was the British corporations that they believed had been gouging the colonists. They believed that corporate greed was in part responsible, and the unwillingness of Parliament to intercede in their behalf, but rather become allies of corporate greed. Consequently, John Marshall makes the point in some of his arguments that you really had to sell the idea of corporations in America because corporations tended to leave left people with a bad taste in their mouths. But the fact of the matter is, as he points out, and I think McCulloch versus Maryland, corporations are very, very important to the future of this country, because you've got to find ways, you've got to be able to give organized capital the opportunity to be successful here. And they need the protection of government to do it. And that's the whole basis of the idea of creating corporations, laws of incorporation, protecting businesses and protecting risk the limited liability legislation and all the rest of it that many of the states are passing, but the states were comfortable that they could control it. They were really worried about the federal about Congress.
How does this stuff square up, Dr. Bill, with Jefferson's view of a successful agrarian state? I mean, he had to be cognizant of the corporations as well.
Oh, Jefferson was very anti-corporation. Yeah, I mean he was anti-bank, exactly. He was really an opponent of this, and he thought that all of that was the beginning of the end. That was the that kind of thing in European countries is what produced revolutions and everything else, is corporate greed on the one hand and large numbers of propertyless indigent people on the other. And when you put them all together in a city and make them all live together, you're just asking for trouble. And that's to him, the stability of the entire future of America was based on the fact that we remain predominantly agricultural. And that leads directly into Madison's data, which says that by the time we reach what he believes is going to be about 192 million people, the agrarians America is gone.
Do we know what the population of the United States was in 1933?
We may know, Bob, but I don't.
That would be interesting to see how close he got.
I think your point about the fact that 1930s happened to be the Depression, which happened to produce Roosevelt, which happened to produce the New Deal, which produced a major turnaround in direction and definition of the role for government in American society during this period of crisis. It's quite a coincidence.
Well, it is.
This is exactly the period that Madison predicted.
And the other thing, his other prediction is largely true as well, because here in 2014, we live in a country where the vast amount of the property, whether it be real or personality, the vast amount of property in this country is in fact controlled by less than 1% of the
people. We are, and this is the stuff that nobody will say. We hear all of this stuff about the threat of inequality and the dangers of inequality, but people refuse to lay out exactly what the dangers are. This is the major danger, is that you are creating a two-tiered society, which they realized, the founders realized, you couldn't allow to happen. You had to find a way to include everybody. That's the irony at the beginning of the program today when I was talking about this United Way campaign and the amount of money we need. What we're doing is we're destroying community in pursuit of money to help those in need in the community, if that makes sense. And I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot. But anyway.
Well, I agree. I'll let you wrap up, but I couldn't resist. I had to ask those questions.
Hey, listen,
sorry.
That's great. I appreciate the questions, and thank you. We've got to get ready to get out of here, Bob. I've got less than 2 minutes to go. Thank you. This is about all the time we've got today for the Virtual Center. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow, remember, will be our abbreviated day. We'll begin at one half hour late. We'll begin at 1:30 in Eastern Time. Tomorrow, so we'll be on from 1:30 to 3 tomorrow, and then Wednesday we'll be back to our regular 2-hour format. For the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, this is Bill O'Brien thanking you so very much for listening. Please be safe. We really do want you to be able to come back and join us here at the Virtual Center. Thank you. Be safe and enjoy your evening.